When my daughter told me to hand over all our financial papers after my husband passed, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Just let me handle it, Mom," she'd said. "I just want you to be able to rest." And I believed her. I let her turn our home into a perfect sanctuary, cutting off calls from friends, preventing those chats over the fence. My world shrank, and I mistook isolation for peace. Until one day, my longtime neighbor asked a simple question: "Do you really know what your daughter does for a living?" That question shattered everything. I'm Susan Miller, 66 years old, from Maple Creek, Connecticut, and this is the story of how I realized my loving daughter had built a perfect cage around me and how I had to break myself out. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to listen to more meaningful life stories with us. Your support is our biggest motivation to keep sharing. My house in Maple Creek always smelled of lemon polish and silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, though. It was an engineered stillness, an emptiness that had been carefully wiped clean of any dust. After my husband Tom passed away 5 years ago, the chaos of grief made me crave order. My daughter Jessica brought that order. She turned our home into a shrine of neatness, a place where everything had its spot, where painful memories were tucked away in labeled boxes, and where even the morning sun had to pass through spotless sheer curtains. At first, I was grateful. I thought that neatness was a comforting embrace, a way to keep my crumbling world from falling apart completely. But as the years went by, I slowly came to realize that these gleaming walls weren't meant to protect me, but to imprison me. That morning was just like any other. Autumn had painted the trees outside my window a soft, faded yellow, but the air inside was kept at a steady 72 degrees, a synthetic warmth that never changed with the seasons. I was tending to Tom's orchid. It was the last gift he ever gave me, a spray of pure white blossoms with delicate purple veins, like ink bleeding on silk paper. Jessica had placed it in a white ceramic pot in a corner of the living room that received exactly 4 hours of indirect sunlight each day. She said those were the ideal conditions, and they were. The orchid had bloomed continuously for 3 years, perfect, flawless flowers that were beautiful in an almost unnatural way. I used a small mister to spray a fine dew on its glossy green leaves. Tiny droplets clung to them, sparkling like diamonds. I used to love my garden, love the feel of damp earth under my fingers, the smell of roses after the rain. But Jessica said gardening was too strenuous for me, that my backaches would get worse, that the bugs and chemicals weren't good for a woman of 66, so the garden was gradually abandoned, and weeds began to choke the flower beds Tom and I had planted together. Instead, I had this orchid, a perfect, controlled, and lonely beauty, just like me. As I was gently wiping a leaf, the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the carefully constructed silence of the house. I instinctively flinched, my shoulders tensing up. I didn't even need to look at the caller ID. Only one person called me at exactly 9 in the morning, every single day. I walked over to the small table and picked up the receiver. "Hello, sweetheart." "Good morning, Mom." Jessica's voice came through, sweet as honey but with a layer of cold steel underneath. She was always like that, efficient and precise even in her greetings. "Have you taken your medicine?" "Yes, dear. I just took it," I replied, my eyes still on the orchid. "Good. I was just checking. Are you planning on going out today?" "I don't think so. I was just going to read." "That's good," she said, and I could picture the satisfied smile on her face. "By the way, I heard that Dorothy Peterson is starting her rumor-mongering again." I fell silent. Dorothy, or Dot as we all called her, had been my neighbor for 30 years. She was a retired nurse who could talk for hours about the tomatoes in her garden or her new grandbaby's first tooth. Jessica continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I know you two used to be close, but you have to be careful. People with too much time on their hands tend to make up stories. Remember the Hendersons down the street? Dorothy went around telling everyone he went bankrupt when they just moved to be closer to their grandkids. I don't want you getting caught up in that kind of toxic gossip. You're too kind, Mom, too trusting. Dorothy's not like that." I started to protest weakly, but Jessica cut me off. "Mom," her voice softened, a tactical gentleness, "I'm just looking out for you. You've been so vulnerable since Dad died. There are people who will take advantage of that. They get close to you, pretend to be friends, and then fill your head with negativity. It's my job to protect you from that. You understand, don't you? I sighed. I understand, Jess. Wonderful. Well, you just stay in and rest. I'll call you again this afternoon. Love you. Love you too. I put the phone down. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt heavier. I walked to the window and gently parted the curtains. Across the white picket fence, Dorothy was fussing with her chrysanthemums, her wide-brimmed straw hat hiding most of her face. She saw me, smiled, and gave a warm, familiar wave. My heart gave a little squeeze. I managed a slight nod in return, then quickly let the curtain fall back into place, shutting out the world. A sense of shame crept through me, a guilt for spurning a lifelong friendship because of my daughter's warning, but the fear of conflict, the fear of disappointing Jessica, was stronger. She only wants what's best for me, I told myself. She's smart, successful. She understands the world better than I do. I should trust her. I went back to my armchair and tried to focus on the historical novel I was reading. The words danced before my eyes, but my mind wandered. I remembered the old days, when this house was always filled with laughter. Tom would throw open all the windows to let the breeze in, and I'd be busy in the kitchen, getting ready for a backyard barbecue. Friends and neighbors would come and go, bringing potato salad, bottles of wine, and endless stories. Dorothy and I would sit on the porch, sipping iced tea and talking about everything and nothing. It was a life full of color, full of sound, full of connection. Now, this house felt more like a museum than a home. Everything was clean, orderly, and silent. The connections had been severed, one by one, so skillfully and gradually that I'd hardly noticed. First, it was the garden club. Jessica said it was too much for me. Then the book group she claimed the pointless debates would tire me out. Slowly, the phone calls from friends grew less frequent, partly because I rarely answered, and partly because Jessica had gently told them I needed quiet space to heal. She had built a narrative of a fragile, aging mother who needed to be shielded from the complexities of the world. And I, in my grief and loneliness after Tom's death, had unwittingly played the starring role. The phone rang again. This time, the screen read, Patricia Wells. Patricia was my best friend from college. We'd been through thick and thin together. I remembered gut-busting laughs, comforting each other through divorces, sharing the joy of watching our children grow up. My hand trembled as it hovered over the phone. A part of me screamed to hear my friend's voice, to reconnect with the world I had lost. But then, Jessica's words echoed in my head, sharp as a razor. Patricia, can't you see, Mom? She only calls you when she needs someone to complain to about her kids. She drains your energy. You're tired enough as it is. You don't need to carry someone else's burdens. I pulled my hand back as if the phone were red hot. I sat frozen, listening to it ring, again and again, until it finally stopped and went to voicemail. A heavy silence descended. The blinking light on the phone, signaling a new message, was like a tiny, accusing eye. What had I done? Who had I become? I got up and went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea. My movements were mechanical, lifeless. I took out the porcelain teapot Tom and I had bought on a trip to England. I boiled the water, placed the tea leaves in the pot, and poured. The aroma of chamomile filled the air, a scent that was supposed to be comforting, but today it just made me feel emptier. I sat at the kitchen table, looking out the window. Dorothy's garden was a riot of color, a painful contrast to my own silent backyard. I saw her talking to the mailman. They were both laughing. A normal conversation. An everyday connection. Things I used to have. Jessica said she did all of this because she loved me, and I believed it. I clung to it like a drowning person to a piece of driftwood, because if it wasn't love, then what was it? If this meticulous care wasn't protection, was it control? If this isolation wasn't to keep me safe, was it a prison? Those questions were too terrifying to face, so I pushed them down, buried them deep beneath a layer of gratitude and dependence. I looked around my home, the photos of Tom and me on the wall, our smiles frozen in the past. Then a more recent one, of Jessica and me on my 65th birthday. Her arm was around my shoulder, her smile radiant and confident. I looked happy enough in the picture, but my eyes, if you looked closely, held a weariness, an emptiness I hadn't recognized at the time. We looked like the perfect mother-daughter pair from a magazine, but a picture doesn't tell the whole story. It can't show the silence that fell as soon as the camera was lowered. It can't record the gentle but unshakable instructions on how I should live my life. I took a sip of my tea. It had gone cold, just like everything else in my life. I was living in a gilded cage, cared for, fed, and protected from the outside world. The cage was beautiful and safe, but it was still a cage. And the scariest part was that, for a long time, I had convinced myself I liked it. I had mistaken the bars for an embrace and the silence for peace. But today, for the first time in a long while, a crack had appeared in the perfect surface of that cage. Dorothy's question, my hesitation when Patricia called, the image of my neighbor's smile over the fence, it all came together to form a vague but persistent feeling of unease. A small, dangerous question began to form in my mind, a question I had tried to avoid for years. What if Jessica was wrong? What if everything she said was part of a bigger plan? A plan where I wasn't the one being protected, but the one being preyed upon. The thought was as fleeting as a ghost, and I quickly pushed it away. It couldn't be. Jessica was my daughter. She loved me. She must. I stood up and took my cold tea to the sink. I needed to keep busy. I would polish the porcelain figurines on the mantel. I would reorganize my closet. I would do anything to keep those terrifying questions at bay. I would continue to believe the story Jessica had written for me, because the truth, if it was something different, might just destroy everything. I looked back at the orchid. Its white blossoms, perfect and still under the artificial light, seemed to mock me. They were beautiful, but they had no scent. They were alive, but they weren't really free. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, the one piece of Tom's that Jessica couldn't convince me to put in storage, I realized a sad truth. That orchid was a mirror of my life. And the gardener, the one who decided the amount of water, the amount of light, and even the air it breathed, was none other than my daughter. 5 days. In my carefully measured world, 5 days felt like an eternity. Jessica had to attend an important financial conference in Chicago. It was an annual event she couldn't miss, a stage for her to shine among her ambitious peers. For her, it was an opportunity. For me, it was a breath of fresh air, a precious pause between the direction and the control. The morning she left, the house itself seemed to exhale. The air was no longer thick with her invisible presence. I had stood at the door, waving goodbye to the black Uber until it disappeared behind the row of autumn-colored maple trees. When the door closed, I didn't go right back inside. I stood there, taking a deep breath of the crisp October air. It smelled of damp leaves and cold earth, a real, living scent I had almost forgotten. The first day passed in a state of near disbelief. I did things I hadn't done in a very long time. I opened all the windows, letting the cool breeze rush in, carrying a few dry leaves with it. I put on Tom's old jazz records, letting the improvisational melodies of Miles Davis fill the silence. I brewed a pot of strong, black coffee instead of the herbal tea Jessica insisted was better for my heart. Each small act felt like a quiet rebellion, an assertion that I still existed, separate from my role as the mother who needed care. But this sudden freedom only highlighted the invisible bars of my cage. I realized I had almost no one to call. Patricia was probably still upset that I had ignored her. My friends from the book club had likely grown accustomed to my absence. I walked out onto the back porch and looked at the garden. The climbing roses that Tom had loved were now stunted and scraggly, choked by wild vines. A profound sadness washed over me. Jessica hadn't just taken away my friends. She had taken away my joys, the little pieces that made up my life. By the second day, I decided I had to do something. Nothing big, just a small act to reclaim a piece of myself. I found my old gardening gloves, stiff from disuse, and a pair of slightly rusted pruning shears. I stepped out into the garden. The sun felt warm on my back, a pleasant sensation. I was struggling with a thorny rose bush when a familiar voice called out from the other side of the fence. "You look like you mean business, Susan." I looked up. Dorothy was standing there, holding a basket full of ripe red tomatoes. She was smiling, a smile that held no judgment, only warmth. "Hello, Dot," I replied, feeling a bit sheepish. "Just trying to clean up a little." "The little bird flew the coop?" she asked, a casual question that cut straight to the point. I nodded. "She's in Chicago. A conference." Dorothy looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes, behind her reading glasses, were sharp and understanding. "Well then, can we talk for a minute? I have something I think you need to see." A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Jessica's warnings about Dorothy echoed in my head. But then I looked into my old neighbor's sincere eyes, and another voice, my own, spoke up. "Of course. Come on in, I'll make some tea." A few minutes later, we were sitting across from each other in my living room, a room that hadn't seen a visitor besides Jessica in years. I set 2 steaming mugs on the table. Dorothy didn't drink right away. She opened her large handbag and took out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. "I went back and forth about bringing this to you, Susan," she began, her voice low and serious. "Since you don't get out in the community much anymore, I was hesitant, but I think you need to know. Do you know what your daughter is really doing?" The question stunned me. I'd never asked Jessica about it, figuring it was part of her independence. She continued, "I don't like to meddle in other people's family business, but I can't just stand by and watch this happen to you." She pushed the clipping across the table. It was from the Hartford Courant, our state paper, dated June 14th of last year. I put on my glasses and read. The headline was, "Retired Couple Sues Financial Firm Over Phantom Investment Fund." The article told the story of a Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, a couple in their 80s from West Hartford. They had sued a prestigious financial consulting firm after discovering their entire life savings of over $200,000 had vanished after being invested in an overseas real estate fund recommended by one of the firm's advisors. The lawsuit had ended quietly with an out-of-court settlement whose terms were not disclosed. The advisor's name wasn't mentioned. The article only described her as a young, highly reputable female financial expert. I finished reading and looked up at Dorothy, my heart pounding. I don't understand. What does this have to do with? "The firm mentioned in the article," Dorothy said slowly, emphasizing each word, "is where Jessica works, and my best friend Mary is Mrs. Robinson's sister." Mary told me the whole story. The advisor went to their house, charmed them with promises of huge returns. She told them it was an opportunity only for special clients. She helped them with all the paperwork, telling them not to worry about the complicated details. Sound familiar, Susan? My throat was dry. I remembered the countless times Jessica had said similar things to me. "You don't need to worry about these numbers. Just let me handle the paperwork. This is a smart strategy that not everyone knows about." "But why do you think it was Jessica?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It could have been someone else at the firm." Dorothy sighed, her eyes full of pity. "Mary said," her sister described the advisor, "a young, blonde woman, always dressed in designer clothes, with a smile that could make you believe anything. And most importantly, Susan, the advisor used the story of her own widowed mother to gain their trust. She told them how her mother wasn't good with finances, and how hard she had to work to make sure her mom had a comfortable life. She said she thought of the Robinsons as her own parents. A chill ran down my spine. That was Jessica's story. That was the story she told me, over and over, to reassure me, to cement her indispensable role. The story of the devoted daughter sacrificing everything for her mother. I leaned back in my chair, feeling dizzy. The air in the room seemed to thin. The orchid in the corner, with its perfect beauty, suddenly looked ugly and fake. "I can't believe it," I whispered. "She wouldn't do that." "Susan," Dorothy said, gently placing her hand on mine. Her hand was warm and calloused from her garden, a real and grounding touch. "A mother's love is a powerful thing, but sometimes it's a blindfold. You've been living behind that blindfold for too long. Jessica might love you, in her own way, but that doesn't mean she isn't capable of doing terrible things. Greed is a monster, Susan. It can turn the people we love into strangers." She looked me straight in the eye. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to check for yourself. Look at your papers. Look at your bank accounts. Ask questions. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to Tom, too. He would not want to see you living like this." Her words were like a key, unlocking a door in my mind that I had tried to keep sealed for years. The door to my doubts, my insecurities, the vague feelings that something was wrong. I had always dismissed them, telling myself it was just a widow's grief. But now, with the crumpled newspaper on the table and Dorothy's story, I couldn't ignore them anymore. Dorothy stood up. "I have to go water my plants. You keep the article, and remember, if you need anything, I'm just on the other side of the fence." She left, leaving me alone in the silent room with my cold tea and a horrifying truth beginning to take shape. I picked up the clipping and read it again. A young, highly reputable female financial expert used the story of her own widowed mother to gain their trust. The words were like little hammers, chipping away at the foundation of the world I had built, a world based on absolute trust in my daughter. I looked around the room, at the expensive furniture Jessica had chosen. The abstract art, she said, would make the space more sophisticated. Everything suddenly felt foreign. Was this my home, or just an elaborate stage for Jessica's play? I folded the article and put it in my pocket. I knew what I had to do. The fear was still there, a giant beast coiled in my chest. But alongside the fear, another feeling was beginning to rise. A cold determination. Dorothy was right. I owed myself the truth. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Instead, the ghosts of doubt haunted me, swirling in the dark room, whispering questions I couldn't answer. The image of the Robinsons in the article, who had lost everything, merged with Jessica's smiling face in our family photos. I tossed and turned in the big bed that had once been my safe space with Tom, but now felt cold and strange. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was no longer a familiar lullaby, but the countdown to a truth I both dreaded and desperately needed to face. When the first streaks of dawn crept through the curtains, I was out of bed, not with my usual fatigue, but with a terrifyingly clear purpose. I didn't make tea. I didn't turn on the radio. I went straight to Tom's study. It had been his sanctuary, a small, oak-paneled room filled with books on architecture, unfinished drawings, and the faint, lingering smell of his pipe tobacco. Jessica had cleaned it up after he passed, replacing his old, worn leather armchair with a modern sofa that was rarely used, and packing all his drawings into neatly labeled boxes. But she hadn't touched the old steel filing cabinet in the corner. "Too much messy paperwork, Mom," she had said. "I'll sort through it for you when I have time." Perhaps, in her arrogance, Jessica thought I would never have the courage or the clarity of mind to dig through that mess myself. Today, I was going to prove her wrong. I pulled open the top drawer. The screech of metal on metal was deafening in the early morning silence. Inside were files, alphabetized, all labeled in Jessica's neat, controlled handwriting. Insurance, property taxes, medical bills. It all looked perfectly normal, but I wasn't looking for normal. I was looking for the abnormal hidden beneath that veneer. I started with the legal file. My hand trembled slightly as I flipped through the pages, and then I saw it. Right on top, carefully stapled, was a thick document with a bolded title, Irrevocable Power of Attorney. I'm no lawyer, but that one word hit me like a punch to the gut. Irrevocable. I skimmed the convoluted legal language, but the core meaning was painfully clear. This document, signed 6 months after Tom's death, a time when I was still lost in a fog of grief, gave Jessica near absolute power over all my assets, finances, and even my medical decisions. And it could not be revoked without the consent of the person it was granted to, Jessica herself. I remembered that day vaguely. Jessica had brought over a stack of papers, saying they were just necessary formalities so she could help me manage things more efficiently. "You just need to sign here, Mom," she had said, pointing to the blank lines with an expensive fountain pen. "So you don't have to worry about all this annoying paperwork anymore." And I had signed. I had signed without reading, without questioning, trusting completely that my daughter was acting in my best interest. Looking back, my naivete was stunning, almost criminal. A wave of nausea rose in my throat. I put the paper down, taking a deep breath to steady myself. This was only the beginning. I kept searching. In the real estate file, I found a copy of the deed to the house. And there, Next to my name and Tom's was the name Jessica Miller, added as a joint tenant with rights of survivorship. This meant that when I died, the house would automatically belong to her, completely bypassing my will and my son, Michael. The date on the document was only a year ago. I tried to remember, but couldn't. It was probably one of those times Jessica had handed me a small paper to sign while she was in a hurry. Next was the financial file. This was where the most devastating truth lay. I found bank statements from the retirement account Tom and I had spent our entire lives building. Every single month, regular as clockwork, a large sum of money, $5,000, was being transferred out. The destination wasn't my daily checking account. It was being moved to an account named Miller Investments LLC. LLC, a limited liability company. I had never heard of it. Why was my money going into a company? I shuffled through other papers and found a document of incorporation. Miller Investments LLC was registered in Delaware, a state famous for its lax corporate laws, and the sole manager, the sole beneficiary listed, was Jessica Miller. She had created a shell company using our family name and was systematically draining my retirement fund every month, $5,000 a month. For almost 4 years, I did the quick math in my head. The number that appeared made my head spin. Over $200,000, almost the exact amount the Robinsons had lost. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold filing cabinet. The papers were scattered around me like pieces of my shattered, deceived life. It all fit together: the isolation, the warnings about the neighbors, the control over my relationships. It wasn't protection, it was a strategy. A meticulously calculated plan to blindfold me and deafen me while she slowly bled me dry. Tears started to flow, hot and bitter. But these weren't just tears of grief. There was anger in them. A cold rage began to kindle deep in my soul. Anger not just at Jessica, but at myself. How could I have been so blind? How could I have surrendered control of my own life so easily? After a long while, when the tears had dried, leaving only a steely resolve, I knew I needed one final confirmation. I needed to talk to Michael. I looked at the clock. It was just after 7 in the morning in Connecticut, which meant it was just after 5 in Denver. Too early to call. But I couldn't wait. I didn't dare use the landline, afraid Jessica might have some way of monitoring it. I remembered an old prepaid cell phone Tom had bought for emergencies. I found it in his desk drawer, still charged. I dialed Michael's number. It rang 3 times before my son answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello? Michael. It's Mom." "Mom?" His voice was instantly awake, a mix of surprise and concern. "What's wrong? Why are you calling from a strange number at this hour?" "I need to ask you something important," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you remember about 3 months ago Jessica gave you a paper to sign? Something about the house?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Michael sighed, a heavy sigh I hadn't heard in a long time. "Yeah, she said it was your idea. That you wanted to simplify things, to avoid inheritance tax problems later on. She said you didn't want me to have to worry, so you'd asked her to handle it. And you signed it?" "I hesitated," Michael admitted, his voice full of regret. "I asked to speak with you directly, but she said you were tired and didn't want to be bothered. She said if I didn't sign, it meant I didn't trust her, and that it would upset you. I didn't want to cause you any more stress. I'm sorry, Mom." "No, sweetheart, it's not your fault," I said, and this time, a single tear rolled down my cheek, but it was a tear of relief, knowing I wasn't alone in being deceived. I'm the one who's sorry for letting her drive a wedge between us. I told Michael everything. About the power of attorney, about the joint ownership of the house, about the LLC and the siphoned funds. Michael listened in silence, a silence that was more terrifying than any shouting. When I finished, he said only one thing, his voice like ice. "I'm booking the first flight home." "No, Michael, don't," I said quickly. "If you suddenly show up, she'll get suspicious. We have to be smart about this. I need you there, safe, and to be my eyes and ears. Did she ever ask you for money?" Another pause. "Yes," he said, his voice low. "Last year. She said you needed a large sum for a new roof, $15,000. She said she didn't want to take it out of your retirement fund, I wired it to her immediately. Our roof was perfectly fine. I looked up at the ceiling, feeling as if it were about to collapse on me. Jessica hadn't just deceived me. She had deceived her own brother, using our love for each other against us. "All right, Michael," I said, my voice now completely calm. "Thank you for telling me. For now, just act normal. If she calls, don't let on that anything is different. I'm going to handle this." We said a few more words and then hung up. I sat in Tom's study, the morning light streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. But I didn't see them anymore. In my mind, everything was crystal clear. The fog had lifted. I could see the entire architecture of the deceit, every detail, every joint. It was an elaborate structure, built on the foundation of my love and trust. But its builder had forgotten one thing. My husband was an architect, and I had lived with him long enough to know that any structure, no matter how solid it appears, has a critical weakness. And I, the one who had been imprisoned inside that structure, was now going to find it. I carefully put all the papers back in their files, returning them to their exact places in the cabinet, leaving no trace. I dried my eyes, washed my face, and went downstairs to brew a pot of chamomile tea, as if nothing had happened. Jessica would be back in 3 days. She would expect to be greeted by her weak, dependent, and utterly ignorant mother. She was in for a surprise. The next 3 days passed in a strange, heightened state of tension. On the outside, I was the same Susan Miller Jessica knew, a quiet woman who followed her medication schedule, read books in the living room, and only went into the garden to water the orchid. But on the inside, a seismic shift had occurred. Every breath I took had a new purpose. I observed everything in the house with different eyes, not the eyes of a passive owner, but of an investigator collecting evidence at a crime scene. The steel filing cabinet was no longer just a piece of furniture, but a chest of secrets. The silent telephone on the shelf was no longer a means of connection, but a potential tool of control. I spent time taking pictures of all the important documents with the old prepaid phone, then sent them to a new email address I'd created under a random name that had no connection to me. I hid the phone and Dorothy's newspaper clipping in an old shoebox, buried deep in the back of my closet behind winter dresses I rarely wore. It was my small arsenal, an insurance policy ensuring that what I'd discovered couldn't be erased by one of Jessica's cleanups. Living a double life felt bizarre. I had to play the part of the naive mother while silently plotting my counterattack. When Jessica called each evening from Chicago, I answered with the same gentle, slightly dependent tone as always. I listened to her talk about her successful seminars, about the important contacts she was making. I listened and felt a cold disgust. She was building an empire on lies, and I was its first and most important cornerstone. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked on the final night. "Your voice sounds a little strange." My heart skipped a beat. "I'm fine, dear," I replied, forcing my voice to sound natural. "It's probably just the change in the weather. I'm just a little tired." "See, I told you," Jessica said, her voice full of triumph. "You can't manage on your own. It's a good thing I'm coming home tomorrow. You just rest, Mom. Let me take care of everything." That sentence, which once brought me comfort, now sounded like a threat. The day Jessica returned, the sky over Maple Creek was gray and drizzling. I had prepared a simple dinner, the roast chicken with rosemary she loved. It was part of my act. I needed everything to look perfectly normal, so she wouldn't have a single suspicion. When Jessica's car pulled up, I was already waiting in the living room, smiling. She walked in, bringing a chill from outside and the scent of expensive perfume. She looked stunning in a cream-colored business suit, her blonde hair professionally styled in an updo. She was the very picture of success, an image so perfect it was hard to believe, a hollow heartbeat beneath it. "Hi, Mom, I'm home," she chirped, setting her designer handbag on a chair and giving me a hug. Her hug was firm but cold, devoid of any real warmth. It felt more like a procedure than a gesture of affection. "Welcome home," I said, patting her back. "How was the trip?" "Fantastic. Very productive," she replied, shrugging off her coat. "I met some major potential partners. But enough about work. You really do look tired. Is that roast chicken I smell?" "You didn't have to go to all that trouble." "It was no trouble. I wanted to do something special for you," I said, and we went into the kitchen. Throughout dinner, Jessica chattered on about Chicago, the skyscrapers, the fancy restaurants, the powerful people. I just sat and listened, nodding, occasionally asking a vague question. I was waiting for the right moment. I couldn't confront her head-on. I had to be strategic, just as she had been with me. I needed to gently peel back her mask, not rip it off violently. After dinner, as we were sitting in the living room with our cups of chamomile tea, I decided it was time. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. "Jess," I began, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "While you were gone, I had some time to look over a few old papers." Jessica raised an eyebrow but kept smiling. "Oh? I told you not to worry about those. Was something confusing?" "Not exactly," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "I was just a little curious. I noticed your name was added to the deed of the house. I don't remember us ever doing that." Jessica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, that! I was going to tell you. It's a legal procedure to protect the asset, Mom. It's to make sure everything transfers smoothly later on, to avoid unnecessary taxes. I consulted with the firm's lawyer. They advised it was the best thing to do." "Your firm's lawyer?" I asked. "Not Mr. George Bailey, Dad's friend?" Jessica let out a light laugh, as if my question were adorably naive. "Oh, Mom, Mr. Bailey is so old school. He isn't up to date on the new laws. This field changes constantly. We need the best, most modern advice." She lied so smoothly. George Bailey might be old, but he was one of the most respected and knowledgeable lawyers in the region. "And what about the irrevocable power of attorney?" I continued, stressing the word irrevocable. "It seems so permanent." This time, the smile vanished completely from Jessica's lips. Her eyes narrowed, a cold calculation flashing through them. She set her teacup down, and when she looked up, her voice had a different tone, a sort of condescending patience. "Mom, I know that legal term sounds scary, but it's the best way for me to take complete care of you. It lets me make quick decisions on your behalf when needed, especially in a medical emergency. Remember when you fell on the stairs? If I didn't have that document, I couldn't have accessed your medical records so quickly. It was a blatant lie. When I fell, I had a minor sprain, and the hospital never asked for any power of attorney. She was twisting the truth, turning a tool of control into a shield of protection. And the company? Miller Investments, LLC, I said, delivering the final blow. I don't understand why my retirement money is being transferred to it every month. Silence. This time, Jessica didn't answer right away. She stared at me, a deep, probing look, as if trying to figure out where these questions were coming from. Her face was a wall. I couldn't read a single emotion. Finally, she sighed, a sigh full of weariness and disappointment, as if I were a difficult child who was trying her patience. "I can't believe this," she said, shaking her head. "It was Dorothy, wasn't it? What did she fill your head with while I was away?" She didn't deny it. She immediately redirected the attack, looking for a scapegoat. "This isn't about Dorothy," I said, my voice firm. "This is about papers with my name and your name on them. I just want to understand." Jessica stood up and began pacing the room, a habit of hers when she was stressed or trying to control a situation. "You don't understand," she said, her voice sharp. "The financial world is complex. What you're calling a company is actually a smart trust vehicle designed to protect your assets from market volatility and inflation risks. Your money isn't gone, it's just being reinvested more safely and efficiently. I had to work very hard to set that up." She stopped in front of me, looking down with an expression that was part hurt, part accusation. "After everything I've done for you, do you have any idea how many promotions, how many personal relationships I've turned down just to have the time to be here and take care of you? I have sacrificed my entire life, and this is how you thank me? By listening to some old, jealous neighbor and asking these accusatory questions?" Tears began to well up in her eyes. Perfectly controlled tears, just enough to evoke sympathy and guilt. In the past, the sight of those tears would have made me surrender immediately, apologize, and blame myself for hurting my devoted daughter. But not today. Today, looking at those tears, I didn't see pain. I saw a performance. A brilliant performance by a talented actress. I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I just sat there, looking at her, and let my silence speak for me. My silence was the answer. It told her I no longer believed her smooth explanations. It told her I was no longer moved by her crocodile tears. My silence seemed to fluster Jessica more than any accusation could have. She was used to controlling the conversation, used to me backing down. When I didn't, she seemed to lose her footing. Finally, she wiped her tears and took a deep breath, regaining her composure. The perfect mask was back in place. "Maybe we shouldn't talk about this right now," she said, her voice returning to its usual gentleness. "We're both tired. You need to rest. We'll talk later." "Everything is going to be fine, Mom. You just need to trust me." She leaned down, gave me a light peck on the forehead, and turned to go upstairs. "I'm tired too. Good night." I sat alone in the living room, listening to her footsteps fade on the stairs and the sound of her bedroom door closing. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel defeated. I just felt a cold clarity. The first confrontation was over. I hadn't broken through her wall of defense, but I had made a crack. I had shown her that I was no longer a passive audience member in her play. I had let her know that I was starting to read the script. I knew that from now on, everything would be different. She would be more careful. She would watch me more closely. The cat and mouse game had truly begun. In the days following that quiet confrontation, a false peace settled over our house. Jessica acted as if nothing had happened. She maintained her schedule of morning calls, reminded me about my medicine, and brought home healthy meals. But there was a subtle shift in how she treated me. The sweetness in her voice now had a thin, brittle glaze over it, with an undercurrent of vigilance. When she looked at me, it was no longer with the eyes of a caring daughter, but of a prison guard checking on her inmate, searching for signs of rebellion. I, for my part, continued my own performance. I appeared docile, a bit confused, and easily persuaded. I agreed with her explanations about the financial matters, saying things like, "Perhaps I was worrying too much, and I'm sorry I ever doubted you." I needed to lull her suspicions to sleep. I needed time. But inside, desperation was slowly eating at me. The conversation with Jessica had shown me a harsh truth. I couldn't beat her with words. She was a master of language, an architect of lies. Every sentence was calculated to corner me, to make me doubt myself. That irrevocable power of attorney was like an invisible chain, and I could feel it tightening every day. I was trapped. I was alone in my own home, facing an enemy I had once loved more than anything. During sleepless nights, I would often go to Tom's study. I'd sit on the cold, modern sofa Jessica had bought, look at the neat space she had created, and try to find some warmth, some guidance from my late husband. "What do I do now, Tom?" I would whisper into the darkness. "I've been too weak. I've let her go too far." And then, one stormy night, as thunder rumbled outside and rain lashed against the window panes, a memory flickered in my mind. A faint memory, almost buried by the grief of Tom's final days. It was an afternoon in the hospital, just a few days before he passed. Tom was so weak, his voice was just a hoarse whisper. He had gripped my hand, his deep, tired eyes boring into mine. He had said something, an important instruction. At the time, I was too distraught to really listen, to grasp its full meaning. But now, in the quiet of the night, his words echoed back to me, astonishingly clear. "Susan, you have to promise me. If you ever feel lost because of her, go to the bank, Bank of America, ask for my safe deposit box. Only you can open it. The bank, a safe deposit box. How could I have forgotten something so important? Perhaps because for 5 years, I had lived in a state of denial, unwilling to face anything that might disturb the fragile peace Jessica had created. But now, Tom's words were no longer a distant memory. They were a lifeline. The next morning, I acted with a decisiveness that surprised even myself. I told Jessica I wasn't feeling well and wanted to take a short walk for some fresh air. It was the perfect excuse. Jessica, perhaps wanting to play the part of the dutiful daughter after our tense confrontation, didn't object. "All right, Mom," she said, her voice full of concern. "But don't go too far. And take your phone." I put on a heavy coat, pulled a wool hat down over my face, and left the house. Instead of walking in the park, I went straight to the center of town, to the Bank of America branch on Main Street, an old brick building Tom and I had been going to for decades. My heart was pounding as I walked inside. The warm air and the smell of old money calmed me slightly. I went to the counter, and after showing my identification, I asked the teller about Thomas Miller's safe deposit box. The young woman typed on her computer and then nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Miller, Box 314. According to our records, you are the only authorized person to access it." She led me into a secure vault with steel walls and a massive door. She used her key, then guided me to use the small key I had found in Tom's box of keepsakes. With a dry click, the door to Box 314 sprang open. Inside was a gray metal box, heavier than I expected. The teller left me alone in a private viewing room, a small cubicle with just a table and a chair. I placed the box on the table, my hands trembling. What was I expecting? Some old papers? A memento? I lifted the lid. Inside, right on top, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. On it, in Tom's familiar, slightly slanted handwriting, were the words, "For my dearest Susan." Beneath the envelope were stacks of $100 bills, neatly bound in bank wrappers. I counted them. 5 stacks, $25,000, a substantial amount of cash. When had Tom prepared this? Why? I set the money aside and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages long. I began to read, and Tom's words seemed to speak directly to me, reaching across death itself to bring me the truth. "My dearest Susan, if you are reading this letter, it means my greatest fear has come true. I hope with all my heart that you never have to open this box, that it will lie dormant in this vault forever. But I also know our daughter. I know her ambition, and I know the lack of compassion in her heart. I saw it when she was just a child, Susan, the way she could turn on the tears to get what she wanted, only to stop the second the toy was in her hand. The way she always knew just what to say to please adults, to manipulate her friends. I tried to tell you, but you, with your kind mother's heart, only saw a smart and clever child. I couldn't bring myself to shatter that image for you. I love Jessica, but I do not trust her. Our daughter has my mind, but she lacks your heart. That is a dangerous combination. After I'm gone, you will be vulnerable, and she will see that as an opportunity, not a responsibility. She will not protect you. She will control you. She will not care for our assets. She will seize them. She will do all of this in the name of love, and that will be the cruelest part. I have left you this money, $25,000. Use it. Do not hesitate. This is your war fund. You will need it to buy your freedom. And more importantly, go see George Bailey. I have spoken with him. George knows all of my concerns. He is the only person you can trust completely. He promised me he would help you if the worst should happen. Susan, I know you are stronger than you think. You have stood by me through so much. Don't let her convince you that you are weak or confused. That is her weapon. Do not fight her with emotion. She will use it against you. Fight her with logic, with facts. A good architect always knows where a structure's foundation is. Jessica's foundation is money and reputation. Attack it there. Fight for yourself, Susan. Fight for Michael. And know that wherever I am always with you. Love you forever. Tom! I dropped my head to the table, tears streaming down my face, soaking the letter. But this time, they were not tears of fear or desperation. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, and of a rising strength. Tom had known. He had always known. He had not abandoned me. Even in death, he was still protecting me, in the only way he could. He had left me a map, a plan, and the tools to fight back. This letter was more than a warning. It was a validation. It told me that I wasn't crazy, that my suspicions were real, that I wasn't a terrible mother for thinking ill of my own daughter. I had been given a gift more precious than the cash in the box, the permission to believe in myself. I sat up straight and dried my eyes. I carefully folded the letter and placed it, along with the money, in my handbag. When I walked out of the private viewing room, my posture was different. I was no longer a timid, frightened old woman. I felt taller, more solid. When I stepped out of the bank, the rain had stopped. The gray clouds had broken apart, making way for the weak afternoon sun. Everything seemed brighter, clearer. I was no longer alone. I had Tom's memory and his wisdom. I had the financial means to begin, and I had an ally waiting, George Bailey. I stepped out of the heavy oak doors of the Bank of America, and the world seemed to have changed. The rain had stopped, leaving behind clean, fresh air and a washed-out sky. Small puddles on the sidewalk reflected the weak, gray blue of the post-storm sky, and for the first time in years, I didn't see them as the treacherous slipping hazards Jessica always warned about. Instead, they glittered like broken mirrors, each piece reflecting a part of the real world, a world I was about to step back into. In my handbag, the envelope with Tom's letter and the stacks of cash created a tangible weight, an anchor pulling me back to reality, keeping me from being swept away by the storm of fear and doubt. That weight wasn't just physical, it was the weight of truth, of a love that transcended even death, and of a responsibility I now had to shoulder. Tom hadn't left me a legacy of wealth, but a legacy of clarity. He had given me a blueprint, not for a building, but for the fight to reclaim my own life. And on that blueprint, one name was circled in the red ink of trust, George Bailey. I walked home, but my steps were different. I no longer walked with the careful shuffle of an old woman, my eyes glued to the pavement. I held my head high. I looked at the people passing by, strangers busy living their lives, and I no longer felt like an invisible ghost. I was a part of this world, and I had a purpose. Tom's letter had given me back not just my identity, but my right to exist. When I got home, the house now appeared in a completely different light. It was no longer a safe cocoon, nor was it entirely a prison. It had become a chessboard. Every piece of furniture, every door, every window was a piece in a complex game I was about to play. Jessica was in the kitchen, her back to me, talking on the phone. Her posture was ramrod straight, her voice clear and authoritative, even when just making an appointment. "Yes, of course. Tuesday at 9 is perfect. I'll arrange for the documents to be sent over beforehand. Thank you." She hung up and turned, a professional smile flicking onto her lips when she saw me. "There you are, Mom. Did your walk help?" "Yes, much better," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. I took off my coat and hung it on the hook with deliberate slowness. The fresh air did me good. "I made you some ginger tea, to warm you up," she said, pointing to a steaming white porcelain mug on the table. I looked at the mug. Before, I would have seen it as a gesture of care. Now, I saw only a tactic: ginger tea to warm me up. Everything Jessica did had a carefully calculated purpose: to reinforce her image, to maintain her control. "Thank you," I said and sat down, but I didn't touch the tea. I placed my handbag on the floor next to my chair, feeling its weight as a constant reminder. Jessica leaned against the kitchen counter, her arms crossed, observing me. Her blue eyes, so much like Tom's, but lacking his warmth. They were sharp, analytical. "You seem different. Is something wrong?" I had prepared for this question. I knew any shift in my demeanor would be detected. "It's nothing," I said, looking out the window. "It's just..." Walking past the park, I saw the Hendersons' old maple trees. They've gotten so big, it made me think of your father. It was the perfect answer. It both explained my pensiveness and invoked a subject Jessica couldn't argue with: the memory of her father. Using Tom in this way sent a pang of guilt through me, but I knew it was necessary. In this war, everything could be a weapon. Jessica's expression softened. The vigilance in her eyes was replaced by a calculated flicker of sympathy. "I know, Mom. I miss him every day, too. That's why I try so hard to take good care of you. It's what he would have wanted." She invoked Tom again, but in her own way, twisting his love into a justification for her own actions. The audacity of it made the anger flare up in me again, but I smothered it instantly. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I needed calm. I needed the clarity of a chess player contemplating their next move. I knew I had to see George Bailey as soon as possible, but I couldn't go right away. Jessica would be suspicious. I needed an undeniable excuse, a reason legitimate enough for me to be out of the house alone for a couple of hours. The opportunity came 2 days later. Dorothy called, and this time I answered immediately, despite Jessica's annoyed glance from the next room. Dorothy's granddaughter was getting married, and she wanted my advice as someone who once had a magnificent rose garden on choosing flowers for the wedding. That was it. The perfect cover. It involved a person Jessica disliked, which made it all the more authentic. After hanging up, I told Jessica, "I'm going over to Dorothy's for a little while. Her granddaughter's getting married, and she wants to pick my brain about roses." Jessica frowned. "Mom, I've told you about her. You don't have to let her bother you. You can just say you're busy. It'll just be for a little while," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It's been a long time since we've really talked anyway. It would be rude to say no. Besides, talking about flowers might cheer me up." I added that last detail deliberately. Anything that would cheer me up fit the role of a mother in need of emotional support. Jessica didn't look happy, but she couldn't find a reasonable excuse to stop me without seeming overly controlling. "Well, don't be long," she said, a hint of a pout in her voice, "and don't let her fill your head with any negativity." "I won't, dear," I replied, grabbing my coat and my handbag, which still contained the letter and the money. I went to Dorothy's house first. I needed to make my story airtight. We sat in her kitchen and actually talked about wedding flowers. But in between talk of David Austin roses and peonies, I looked my friend in the eye and said, "Dot, I need a favor. I need an excuse to be out for another 2 hours or so. If Jessica calls you, just tell her we're looking through flower catalogs together, okay?" Dorothy didn't ask a single question. She just looked at me with deep understanding and nodded. "You go on, Susan. I've got things covered here." Her unquestioning loyalty gave me strength. George Bailey's law office was at the end of Main Street, in an old sandstone building from the turn of the last century. It was the complete opposite of the modern glass and steel tower that housed Jessica's firm. There was no flashy sign, no young receptionists in designer clothes. Instead, there was a tarnished brass plaque that read Bailey & Son, Attorneys at Law, and a heavy wooden door with a small bell that jingled when I pushed it open. The air inside was warm and smelled of old books, polished wood, and the faint, long-ago scent of tobacco. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves filled with thick, leather-bound law books. Soft yellow light from green-shaded desk lamps cast a glow on neatly stacked files. The place exuded a sense of permanence, of wisdom accumulated over generations, a stark contrast to Jessica's fleeting and volatile world of finance. An older woman with her gray hair in a bun looked up from her desk and smiled at me. "Hello, Mrs. Miller. Mr. Bailey is expecting you." George was rising from behind his large desk as I entered. He was in his 70s, like me, but still looked robust. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his blue eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses were still sharp and alert. He wore a wool vest over his shirt, an old-fashioned but dignified look. He was the embodiment of integrity, a man whose foundations were built on unshakable principles, just like the buildings Tom used to design. "Susan, please, come in. Sit down," he said, his voice deep and warm. He didn't seem surprised to see me. Perhaps Tom had been preparing him for this for a long time. He came around the desk, not taking his seat of power, but sitting in the client armchair across from me. It was a small gesture, but it closed the distance between lawyer and client, leaving only two old friends. "Can I get you some tea?" he asked. I shook my head. "Thank you, George. I don't have much time." He nodded, his expression turning serious. Tom told me this day might come. That one sentence was all the permission I needed. I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to justify being here to act against my own daughter. I took a deep breath, opened my handbag, and took out the copies I had made: the power of attorney, the house deed, the LLC and corporation documents. I placed them on the small coffee table between us. "This is what I found," I said, my voice wavering slightly. George put on his glasses and picked up the papers one by one. He read them slowly, carefully, not missing a single detail. The silence in the room was broken only by the rustle of paper and the ticking of a large grandfather clock in the corner. I watched his face. His silver eyebrows knitted together as he read the words "irrevocable." His lips tightened almost imperceptibly as he reviewed the terms of the house ownership. When he got to the bank statements and the documents for Miller Investments LLC, he let out a long, heavy breath. He set the papers down on the table, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw no judgment, only a deep sadness and empathy. "I'm sorry, Susan," he said softly. "I'm truly sorry. This is even worse than Tom feared." He picked up the power of attorney again. "Legally, this is practically a brick wall. Irrevocable means what it says. To nullify it, you'd have to go to court and prove you were incompetent when you signed it, or that you were coerced or deceived. And you know what Jessica would do, don't you?" I nodded, a bitter taste in my throat. She'd say I'm old and confused. She'd call Dorothy and my other old friends to testify that I've been isolating myself. She'd use her own actions to prove I need special care. "Exactly," George affirmed. "She would turn you into a victim, not of her, but of old age. She'd spin the narrative, turning her greed into filial piety. She would use doctors she chose, experts she hired, to paint a picture of a mother no longer capable of making her own decisions. It would be a nasty, expensive, and long legal battle. And in the end, you would very likely lose. Judges tend to side with the caregiver, especially when the paperwork looks as legitimate as this." Every word he spoke was like a hammer blow, shattering the fragile hope I had been nursing. A brick wall. I was locked behind a brick wall built with my own signature. The desperation I had managed to suppress since leaving the bank began to rise again. "So, there's no way?" I whispered. "I just have to live the rest of my life like this? Watching her drain everything Tom and I worked our whole lives for?" George didn't answer right away. He looked at the documents on the table, then back at me. "Ordinarily, I would say the road ahead is very difficult. We could sue, but the chances of winning are not high, and the emotional toll would be immense." He paused, and there was a shift in his eyes. "But Tom didn't leave us with an ordinary road," I remembered. I had almost forgotten my most important weapon. I opened my handbag again, this time carefully removing Tom's cream-colored envelope. My hands were still shaking a little as I handed it to George. "He left this for me," I said. George took the envelope with a certain reverence. He recognized his friend's handwriting immediately. He opened it and began to read the letter. As he read, I could see the emotions flicker across his face. Sadness at the opening lines, understanding as Tom described Jessica's character, and then a sharp focus, a cold calculation in his eyes as he reached the end. When he finished, he said nothing for a long moment. He placed the letter on the table, right next to the legal documents. The letter, with its words of love and wisdom, lay in stark contrast to the cold, soulless clauses of the contracts. "A good architect always knows where a structure's foundation is," George repeated Tom's words, his voice thoughtful. "Tom was right, Susan. We've been trying to figure out how to break through the wall, but Tom is showing us another way. Don't break the wall. Make the builder destroy her own foundation." I looked at him, not quite understanding. "What do you mean?" George leaned forward, his voice no longer that of a comforting friend, but of a strategist outlining a battle plan. "We can't sue Jessica for what she's already done. The paper trail is too tight. It's your word against hers. But," he stressed, "we can create a situation where she does something new, something undeniably illegal. We can't prove past deception, but we can bait a trap for future criminal behavior." A trap. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "How?" "Tom already told us," George said, pointing to the letter. "Jessica's foundation is money and reputation. Her greed is her greatest weakness. Right now, she's slowly and legally on paper draining your assets. But what if a huge quick profit was dangled right in front of her? Do you think her caution would win out over her greed?" He looked me straight in the eye, and I could see the audacious plan forming in his mind. "Jessica thinks she has you completely under her thumb. She underestimates you. She believes you are weak, docile, and completely ignorant. That arrogance is our weapon. We are going to use her contempt for you against her." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street. "We're not going to court as plaintiffs, Susan. We're going to the FBI with undeniable proof of an active fraud in progress. We're not going to try to get back what's lost. We're going to stop her from taking anything more and make sure she pays for what she's done." He turned back to me, and in that moment, I no longer saw a kindly old lawyer. I saw a patient hunter, a loyal friend fulfilling a final promise. But to do that, I need your help. Not just your consent, but your active participation. You will have to face her every day, and you will have to act. You will have to put on a perfect performance. He paused, his gaze boring into me, assessing, making sure I understood the weight of what he was about to say. Susan, she thinks you're a lamb, weak and in need of herding. It's time to show her the wolf inside. You're going to have to give the performance of your life. His words echoed in the quiet office. A lamb, a wolf. For 5 years, I had been a lamb, meekly following the lead of the shepherd who was actually a wolf in sheep's clothing. I had forgotten that I had teeth, that I had claws, forged over 66 years of life. A cold, powerful resolve spread through my body. The fear was still there, a cold undercurrent, but it was now overshadowed by another emotion, one I hadn't felt in a very long time: righteous anger. I wasn't just doing this for myself, for the stolen money, or for the house. I was doing this for Tom. I was doing this for Michael. I was doing this for the truth. I stood up to face George, and I felt my back straighten. "What do I have to do?" I asked, and my voice was steady, without a tremor. George Bailey smiled, the first genuine smile since I'd walked in. It was the smile of a teacher who has just seen the potential in his student, the smile of a general who has just found a brave soldier. "First," he said, returning to his desk and pulling out a yellow legal pad, "we need some bait. Something big, something tempting, something Jessica simply cannot resist." I left George Bailey's office with not just a plan, but a role to play, the performance of my life, as he'd called it. As I walked down the familiar sidewalks of Maple Creek, I was no longer seeing the world through the eyes of a lonely widow, but through the eyes of a lead actress about to step onto a fateful stage. Everything around me suddenly became a prop. The red maple leaves scattered on the path were no longer signs of decay, but a carpet for the final act. The quiet houses lining the street were no longer the homes of neighbors, but a silent audience. And my own house, which I was returning to, was the main stage, where the spotlight was about to hit and the play had to begin. For the next few days, I lived in a strange, bifurcated state. One half of me was the Susan Miller of the past, weak, dependent, lost in a fog of willful deception. The other half was a different person, a cool and calculating entity, observing from within, memorizing lines, planning gestures, and waiting for the right cue. I was both the puppet and the puppeteer. Every morning, I woke up and put on the costume of innocence. I practiced a weary smile in the mirror, a slight slump in my shoulders, a distant, somewhat vacant look in my eyes. I had to erase any trace of resolve from my gaze, bury the fire of my anger so deep that only the ashes of resignation showed on the surface. George and I spoke on the phone a few times, using the prepaid phone I kept hidden. He had outlined the main features of the bait. It had to be something big enough to trigger Jessica's insatiable greed, but plausible enough not to arouse suspicion. $100,000, George had said, from a small life insurance policy of Tom's that you just discovered while cleaning out old paperwork. A small, obscure company, which is why the payout was delayed for so long. That delay will explain why it's suddenly appearing now. $100,000. The number made me shiver. It was real money, drawn from George's own savings, an investment in justice. "This isn't my money, Susan," he had said when I hesitated. "Consider it Tom's. He's betting on you. And so am I." His words swept away all my reservations. This wasn't a trick. It was a move calculated with both faith and sacrifice. I spent 2 days preparing for the fateful dinner. I chose a Thursday, an unremarkable day of the week, to avoid any sense of ceremony. I went to the market, carefully selecting the freshest ingredients for beef Wellington, a complicated dish Jessica particularly loved, one I rarely made because it was too much work. That very complexity was part of the message I wanted to send. Mom is trying. Mom is making amends. Mom wants to please you. That afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, I called Jessica while she was still at the office. My voice over the phone was calibrated to have a hint of timidity, a touch of fragility. "Jess, it's me, honey." "Yes, Mom, I'm here. Is everything okay?" Her voice was as efficient as ever, but I could hear a note of caution behind it. I'm fine, dear. I was just wondering if you'd be home for dinner tonight. I'm making something special. I paused for a beat, as if gathering courage. I wanted to talk to you. There was a brief silence on the other end. I could practically hear Jessica's mind analyzing the situation. Talk? About what? Oh, it's nothing big, I said quickly, my tone reassuring. It's just, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day. I just want us to be okay. I'm making beef Wellington. Mentioning her favorite dish was a deliberate psychological move. It evoked memories of the rare times I had indulged her, making her feel special. Oh, she said, and I could sense her guard lowering slightly. I see. Okay, Mom, I'll try to be home early. Around 7? That's wonderful, dear. I'll see you then. When I hung up, I had to grip the kitchen counter to steady myself. My heart was beating like a war drum. The show had officially begun. At 7 o'clock, Jessica came home, bringing with her the evening chill and the scent of success. She looked a little tired, but still radiated an unshakable confidence in her navy blue sheath dress and expensive heels. The house was fragrant with the smell of butter, garlic, and roasting meat. I had set the table in the formal dining room, something we rarely did, usually just eating in the kitchen. I'd laid out the white tablecloth, placed a small vase of chrysanthemums in the center, and lit 2 candles. It was all designed to create an atmosphere of intimacy, a feeling of reconciliation. "Wow, this looks special," Jessica said, a surprised but pleased smile on her face. "You didn't have to do all this." "It was nothing," I replied with a faint smile. "I wanted to. Go wash up and we'll eat." Throughout the meal, I let Jessica lead the conversation. She talked about a big deal she was about to close, about a foolish colleague who had made a mistake, about her plans to upgrade her office. I just listened, nodded, and offered occasional vague praise like, "That's wonderful, dear," or "That sounds stressful." I ate very little, picking at the beef on my plate. I had to look like someone with a lot on her mind, someone weighed down by guilt. As the meal was winding down, Jessica put down her silverware and looked at me. "So, what did you want to talk about?" This was it. The moment I had rehearsed in my head 100 times. I took a deep breath and looked up at my daughter, my eyes programmed to appear apologetic and sad. I'm so sorry, Jess," I began, my voice trembling. "About the other day. About my questions. I was wrong." Jessica crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair, adopting the air of a judge listening to a confession. "I was very hurt, Mom. I never thought you could think of me that way." "I know," I said, lowering my head to look at the napkin in my lap. "I've just been overthinking things. After your father died, sometimes my mind isn't as clear as it used to be, and then Dorothy said those things. I know she didn't mean any harm, but she got me worried for no reason. I let fear get the better of me. I blamed everything, my age, my grief, the neighbor, everything except Jessica herself. It was the perfect confession because it confirmed everything Jessica had always wanted to believe, that I was weak, easily influenced, and completely dependent on her clear-headedness. "I know you only want what's best for me," I continued, looking up at her, my eyes welling with tears. "You've sacrificed so much. I was a terrible mother for doubting your kindness. Can you forgive me?" A slight, magnanimous smile touched Jessica's lips. She was completely sold. She had won. "Oh, Mom, don't say that," she said, her sweet tone returning. "Of course, I forgive you. I understand. You've been through a lot. Just promise me, from now on, if anything is worrying you, you'll talk to me first. Don't listen to outsiders anymore, okay?" "I promise," I whispered, like a forgiven child. We sat in silence for a moment. The tension had vanished, replaced by a false sense of peace. Jessica looked relaxed. The foundation of her arrogance had been reinforced. Now it was time to cast the line. I poked at my slice of apple pie with my fork, feigning thoughtfulness. "Actually, there is something that's been on my mind," I said casually, as if I had just remembered. "What is it?" Jessica asked, completely off her guard. "Well, last week I was cleaning out some of your father's old boxes in the attic, and I found this." I paused for dramatic effect. It was an old life insurance policy from a very small company. I had almost completely forgotten about it. Turns out they had some kind of administrative mess, which is why they've only just sent the check now. A flicker of interest lit up Jessica's eyes. A check? How much was it for? I looked down at my plate, as if the number embarrassed me. $100,000. I could hear Jessica's soft, sharp intake of breath. $100,000. The number hung in the air between us, shimmering and seductive. I honestly don't know what to do with it, I continued, my voice full of engineered bewilderment. The interest rates at the bank are nothing. Inflation will just eat it up. I want to invest it in something, to have a little extra for my old age in case I get sick. Something really safe, but something that will also grow a little faster. I looked up at Jessica, my eyes now full of trust and a well-rehearsed helplessness. I reached out and placed my hand on hers, which was resting on the table. You're the expert, Jess. I don't know the first thing about any of this. I just hear bits and pieces on the news. My voice was naive and trusting. Will you help me? Can you find the best investment fund? Maybe something overseas? I hear the returns are better overseas. Is that right? As long as it's safe. I'm putting it all in your hands. You're the only one I trust. I had dropped all the keywords George had instructed me to use. Expert, I don't know a thing. Grow faster. Overseas. And most importantly, I'm putting it all in your hands. I had offered her not just money, but total control, the thing she craved most. The trap was set, sweet and glittering. I watched Jessica's face in the candlelight. For a split second, just a split second, I saw it, a glint in her blue eyes. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't surprise. It was the look of a predator that has just spotted a fat, unguarded prey. The mask of the dutiful daughter slipped for a millisecond, revealing the true face of cold, hard greed. But then it was gone, as quickly as it had appeared. Jessica took my hand, squeezed it gently, her face once again a picture of concern and responsibility. "Oh, Mom, of course I'll help you," she said, her voice gentle and reassuring. "Don't you worry about a thing. You made the right decision coming to me with this. It's dangerous to take advice from just anyone." She emphasized the word anyone, a subtle dig at Dorothy. Investing overseas can have better returns, that's true, but you have to be very careful. There are a lot of pitfalls. She paused, pretending to think seriously. "Let me look into it. I have some connections, some private investment funds that aren't open to the public, very exclusive and safe. I'll find the absolute best option for you. You can count on me." "Oh, that would be wonderful," I said, breathing a perfect sigh of relief. I knew I could always count on you. The dinner ended soon after. Jessica helped me clear the table, something she rarely did. She was cheerful, talkative, and kept reassuring me that I had done a very smart thing. When she went up to her room, I stood alone in the quiet kitchen. The aroma of dinner lingered, but to me, it now smelled of deceit. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. The woman looking back at me had a weariness I'd never seen before. Her eyes were hollow, and there was a coldness in them. I had succeeded. Jessica had taken the bait. The sweet trap had half snapped shut, but this victory brought me no joy. It only left a bitter taste in my mouth. To trap my daughter, I had to become a deceiver just like her. I had to use her, admittedly false, love and trust as a weapon. I had stoked her greed, fed her arrogance. I wondered, after all of this was over, if I would even recognize myself anymore. I turned off the kitchen light, letting the darkness swallow the clean dishes. The chess game had entered a new phase. I kept up my act as the frail, remorseful, and utterly trusting mother. I'd ask Jessica every day with an air of innocence, "Have you found a fund yet, dear? I'm just a little excited." And Jessica, with the feigned patience of an expert handling an annoying but important client, would reply, "Just be patient, Mom. These things take time. I'm looking at a couple of very promising options. We have to be absolutely sure it's safe for you." But I knew that behind her closed bedroom door, or during the times she stepped out onto the porch for fresh air, important phone calls were being made. I saw her pacing in the garden, her voice low but decisive, her other hand constantly jotting notes in a small notebook. She never talked where I might overhear. That caution, ironically, was the very thing that incriminated her. If this were a legitimate and transparent investment, why all the secrecy? Meanwhile, my world was one of fleeting meetings and coded phone calls. George Bailey had become my director. Every 2 days, I'd make an excuse to go to the grocery store or the pharmacy, but I'd actually drive to a public parking lot in the next town over. George would be waiting in his old sedan. I'd slip into his passenger seat, and we'd have 15 minutes to update each other. "She's taken the bait," I reported during one such meeting. "She's on the phone constantly. I think she's setting it all up herself." George nodded, his expression grim. Just as we predicted, greed has clouded her judgment. $100,000 in cash, with no paper trail, is too tempting a prize. Instead of going through a real investment fund where she'd have to share profits and leave a record, she'll want it all for herself. She'll create her own phantom fund. And that's exactly what George had prepared for. The phantom fund had a grand-sounding name, Sterling Horizon Global Investment Fund. It had a professional-looking website designed by George's tech-savvy grandson. The site was filled with impressive growth charts, all fake, testimonials from satisfied investors, all invented names, and a registration address in the Cayman Islands, a notorious tax haven. Everything was designed to look like an exclusive investment opportunity, the kind a smart financial advisor like Jessica would find for her special clients. More importantly, every communication channel for Sterling Horizon email, phone number was routed directly to a temporary office George had rented, where a retired private investigator, an old friend of his, was playing the part of the fund manager. Every call, every email exchanged between Jessica and the fund was being meticulously recorded, logged, and backed up. We weren't just setting a trap, we were weaving an undeniable web of evidence. A week after our dinner, Jessica made the announcement over breakfast. Her tone was a mixture of suppressed excitement and the pride of someone who had accomplished a difficult task. "Mom, I have wonderful news," she said, pushing a cup of coffee toward me. "I've found a fantastic investment opportunity. It's called the Sterling Horizon Global Investment Fund." I blinked, pretending to be clueless. "That sounds very complicated." "It's not, Mom," Jessica said, her voice persuasive. "It's a private fund in the Caymans that specializes in emerging technologies. The returns are very high, but most importantly, it's extremely discreet and tax efficient. It's the kind of opportunity only people with connections even hear about. I had to pull a few strings to even get them to consider us." The arrogance in her voice almost made me laugh. She truly believed she was the smartest person in the room, that she had uncovered a secret gold mine. "Are they trustworthy, dear?" I asked with feigned concern, a question any mother would ask. "Absolutely, Mom. I vetted them thoroughly. They are completely legitimate," she lied without blinking. "I've spoken with the fund director, a Mr. Peterson, several times, a very professional man. The name Peterson was a subtle, ironic touch from George, an echo of Dorothy's last name. In the following days, Jessica was consumed with preparing the paperwork. She drafted a thick set of contracts herself, downloading templates from the internet and modifying them. I caught a glimpse over her shoulder once as she worked on her laptop. The screen was filled with complex legal and financial jargon, clauses written in a language designed more to obscure than to clarify. The purpose of this contract wasn't to protect me. It was to protect herself, to create a legal-looking facade for a brazen act of theft. When everything was ready, Jessica brought the stack of contracts to me, placing them on the dining table like a trophy. "Here are the contracts, Mom," she said. "It's a bit long, but that's standard procedure. Basically, it just confirms that you authorize me to invest $100,000 into the Sterling Horizon Fund." I picked up the papers, feeling their weight. I flipped through a few pages, pretending to squint at the fine print. "Oh my, so many words. I don't understand any of this." "You don't need to understand all of it," Jessica said reassuringly. "I've marked the most important parts. You just need to sign in those spots, and I'll take care of the rest." She pointed to the little yellow arrows she had stuck to the pages. I hesitated, looking at the pen lying next to the contract. This was a critical part of George's plan. I couldn't just sign. I'm still a little nervous, I said, my voice trembling. I know I promised to trust you, but this is a lot of money. I just feel safer if a lawyer looked it over, just to be sure. What if we go see Mr. George Bailey? He's a friend of Dad's after all. He wouldn't charge us much. I had made a risky move. Mentioning George Bailey could have made Jessica suspicious, but George had anticipated this. She won't think you dare, he had said. She'll see it as the nuisance of a careful old woman, nothing more. And her arrogance will make her think she can pull the wool over George Bailey's eyes, too. And George was right. Jessica sighed, a sigh of exasperation mixed with contempt. Mom, I told you. Mr. Bailey doesn't specialize in this field. He'll just complicate things and waste time. But then another thought seemed to occur to her. Perhaps she thought that having the contract signed in front of a lawyer, even an old-fashioned one, would add another layer of legitimacy to the transaction in my eyes. Or perhaps she was so confident in her ability to manipulate that she believed she could charm the world. But fine, she said, conceding. If it will make you feel better, then all right. It's just a formality anyway. Let me call and make an appointment. We'll sign it at his office. That way you can have complete peace of mind, okay? The irony of the situation was staggering. Jessica, in her blind confidence, was walking directly into her own execution chamber. She thought she was leading me to a procedural meeting, not knowing she was stepping into the very center of the trap. Thank you, dear, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. That would put my mind at ease completely. The call between Jessica and George Bailey's office was, of course, recorded. She explained the situation smoothly. My mother has a small sum she'd like to invest, and being the cautious type, she wants her lawyer to witness the contract signing. I know this isn't your area of expertise, so we won't take up much of your time. We just need you to witness her signature. George, on the other end, played the part of the kind, slightly slow-witted old lawyer perfectly. Oh, of course. Happy to help Susan out. How about Friday at 10 a.m.? My door is always open for old friends. The play was now staged down to the last detail. Every actor knew their lines. The stage was set. All that was left was the final act, where the curtain would fall and the truth would be exposed under the harsh stage lights of justice. The night before the appointment, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, replaying the script in my head. Could I do it? Could I find the strength to look my daughter in the eye as her life came crashing down? A part of me was still a mother. A part of me still loved the memory of the little girl she once was, before greed turned her into a stranger. The pain of betrayal and the pain of maternal love twisted together, forming a sharp knot in my chest. But then I thought of Tom. I thought of his letter, of the faith he had placed in me. Fight for yourself, Susan. His words echoed in my mind, not as a command, but as a gentle encouragement. I wasn't fighting to destroy Jessica. I was fighting to save what was left of our family, our honor, and myself. I was fighting to tear down a structure built on lies, so that one day, maybe, on that ruined foundation, something true could be built again. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I chose a simple dress, a soft blue, the color of peace. I put on a little makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes. I needed to look calm, even a little naively happy, like a mother whose brilliant child was about to secure her a comfortable future. Jessica, by contrast, chose a black power suit. She looked like a warrior going into battle. Her blonde hair was pulled back tightly, not a single strand out of place. Her makeup was flawless. She was the picture of control, but I could see a slight tension at the corners of her mouth, a haste in the way she drank her coffee. She was so close to the finish line, and she didn't want any mistakes. "Ready, Mom?" she asked, picking up the leather briefcase that held the contract. I nodded, grabbing my own handbag. "Ready, dear." We drove to George's office in silence. She focused on the road, and I looked out the window, watching Maple Creek begin its day. Everything looked so normal. People going to work, kids going to school, shops opening their doors. No one knew that inside this small car, a family tragedy was about to reach its conclusion. George Bailey's office was just as it had been the last time, an oasis of stability and tradition in the hurried flow of life. The smell of old books and polished wood seemed thicker, the air heavy with a tension only George and I could feel. Jessica walked in with the confidence of a conquering general, her smile for the elderly secretary just polite enough, but with a hint of condescension, as if she were gracing an old world soon to be left behind. George met us at the door to his office, still in his familiar wool vest. He shook Jessica's hand, a somewhat perfunctory gesture. "Miss Miller, good to see you again." Then he turned to me, and in his eyes was a silent encouragement, an almost imperceptible nod. "Susan, you're looking well." "Thank you, George," I replied, my voice possessing a strange calm, the stillness at the eye of a hurricane. We sat around the polished mahogany conference table. Light from the window streamed in, illuminating the tiny dust motes dancing in the air, the only silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Jessica placed her leather briefcase on the table and opened it with a decisive snap. She withdrew the contract, which now looked more like an indictment than an agreement. "Mr. Bailey," Jessica began, her tone professional and smooth. "As I mentioned on the phone, I'm just here today to assist my mother. She has a small sum she wishes to invest, and I've found an excellent private fund for her. My mother simply wanted the family lawyer present to give her peace of mind." She had skillfully demoted George's role, turning him from a legal advisor into a ceremonial witness. George just smiled benevolently. "Of course, Miss Miller. Anything to make Susan feel comfortable." Jessica pushed the thick contract towards me. "Here you are, Mom. You just need to sign where I've marked." She took a gold-plated fountain pen from her jacket pocket, a luxurious weapon, and placed it next to the contract. All eyes were on me. The pen lay there, gleaming under the light. It was the final key, the action that would spring the trap. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. This was the point of no return. I looked at Jessica. On her face was a skillfully concealed eagerness, an impatience hidden behind an encouraging smile. She believed she was just one signature away from victory. I reached out my hand, my fingers brushing against the cool surface of the paper. I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than I'd expected. I uncapped it, a small click echoing in the tense silence. I looked at the empty signature line, where the name Susan Miller was about to be written to seal a lie. And then, just as planned, the door to George's office opened. It didn't open suddenly or loudly. It opened gently, deliberately. A man in a well-tailored charcoal gray suit stepped in. He wasn't large or intimidating, but a quiet authority radiated from him. He was followed by a younger woman, also in a suit, holding a file. Jessica's head snapped up, annoyance plain on her face, an unwelcome interruption to her perfect plan. "Excuse me, we're in a private meeting," she said, her voice sharp. The man didn't look at Jessica. His eyes scanned the room and settled on George Bailey. "Mr. Bailey?" "Yes," George replied calmly. The man walked to the table, took out a leather wallet, and flipped it open. "I'm Special Agent Robert Hansen, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Fraud Division. This is Special Agent Evans." The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I looked at Jessica. The color was draining from her face. Her confident smile froze, then shattered, replaced by a look of disbelief and confusion. Her blue eyes darted from Agent Hansen to George, then to me, trying to assemble the pieces of a puzzle she couldn't comprehend. George Bailey stood up, his voice no longer gentle. It was as sharp and clear as a church bell. "Miss Miller, we have been recording your entire process of convincing your mother, Mrs. Susan Miller, to invest $100,000 into a company called the Sterling Horizon Global Investment Fund." He paused, letting the words sink in. "A company which, in fact, does not exist." What? Jessica stammered, her voice losing its control for the first time. "That's ridiculous. It's a legitimate fund." I checked. George didn't let her finish. He motioned to Agent Evans. She stepped forward and placed her file on the table. She flipped open the first page. It was a printout of an email. "This is a copy of the first email you sent to Sterling Horizon," George said, his voice like ice. "And this," he pointed to another stack of papers, "is a transcript of all your phone calls with the man you believe to be the fund director. In these conversations, you repeatedly emphasized moving the money offshore and methods to minimize the transaction trail." George continued, each word a hammer blow to Jessica's crumbling foundation. He presented a flowchart of the intended money trail, showing how the $100,000 would move from my account to a shell account, from which 95% would then be wired to a personal account in Delaware under the name Jessica Miller. The remaining $5,000 was the management fee for your phantom fund, wasn't it, Miss Miller? Jessica's face had gone through a complete transformation. From the chalky white of disbelief, it had flushed red with anger and finally settled into a grayish pallor of utter horror as the reality dawned on her. Her wall of defense, built with sophisticated lies, had been demolished in a matter of minutes. There would be no legal battle, no chance to manipulate or spin the story, only cold, undeniable proof. Her eyes finally landed on me. In them, I saw no remorse. I saw raw hatred, the hatred of a predator outsmarted by its prey. She hadn't been defeated by the FBI or by George Bailey. She had been defeated by the weak, confused old mother she had always disdained. "Mom," she whispered, a single word that held a universe of betrayal and disbelief. "How?" I looked my daughter straight in the eye. I felt no triumph, only a deep, hollow sadness. "You underestimated your father," I said softly, "and you underestimated me." Agent Hansen stepped to Jessica's side. "Jessica Miller, you are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and financial elder abuse." When Agent Evans took out the handcuffs, the sound of metal clicking was jarringly loud in the dead silence. The final click, as they closed around Jessica's wrists, was like a judge's gavel, ending a dark chapter of my life. Jessica didn't resist. She seemed to be in a state of shock. All her energy, her confidence, her power had been drained away, leaving only an empty shell. As they led her from the room, she never looked at me again. The door closed behind them, and the office was silent once more. The contract still lay on the table, the gold-plated fountain pen having rolled a little before coming to a stop. The curtain had fallen. The play was over. I sat there, staring into space, feeling exhausted down to my very bones. George placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Susan." I nodded, but I knew that wasn't entirely true. A battle was over, but its aftermath would last a long time. George's voice was gentle but firm. "Greed is a terrible advisor, Miss Miller, especially when you underestimate your mother." The time that followed passed in a strange dream, a blur of days filled with legal procedures, meetings with lawyers, and sympathetic whispers from neighbors. The news of Jessica's arrest spread through Maple Creek like wildfire, a sensational story of a fallen star. I became a tragic figure in the town's narrative, the poor mother betrayed by her own daughter. They didn't know that behind my closed doors, I was no longer a victim. I was busy rebuilding. The first thing I did was sell the house. The house on Elm Street, where I had lived for nearly 40 years, where I had raised 2 children, where I had loved and lost Tom, was no longer a home. Every corner was haunted by memories of control and deception. It was too large and too empty a stage for a new life. I sold it to a young family and felt an immense sense of relief as I handed them the keys. I moved into a smaller, brighter apartment on the other side of town, near the community center. It had a large balcony where I could keep potted plants, a small garden within reach that didn't require me to bend over too much. Michael flew in as soon as Jessica was arrested. He held me tight at the airport, and in his arms I cried, the first real tears since it all began. They weren't tears of pain, but of release. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said over and over. "I should have known." "We were both fooled, honey," I said, stroking his hair. "But we have each other now." And we did. Michael flew in regularly. We video chatted every day. The wall of silence Jessica had deliberately built between us was broken, and the flow of love was reconnected. The $100,000 George had used as bait was returned to him. But I had plans for the money from the sale of the house and what was left in my accounts. I didn't want it to just sit in a bank. I wanted it to mean something. With George's help, I established the Tom Miller Legal Aid Fund. Its purpose was simple: to provide free legal advice and assistance to elderly people facing financial abuse, people who had no voice, people who were being blinded by their own families. Tom's legacy wasn't just buildings of brick and mortar. It was a solid foundation of integrity. and I would continue to build on that foundation. Spring came, and with it, a sense of rebirth. Maple Creek shed its gray winter coat and burst forth in the green of new leaves and the pink of cherry blossoms. I felt myself being reborn, too. I started getting involved at the community center. I signed up for a watercolor class, and I started a new project, a container garden for senior citizens. Much later, I stood among pots of tomatoes, basil, and bright marigolds. A group of my new friends, men and women, were gathered around, their hands dirty with soil, their laughter filling the air. I was showing them how to pinch back a basil plant to make it grow fuller. My own hands, no longer gloved, were caked with damp earth, and I had never felt cleaner. The mail carrier brought me a letter. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope immediately. It was from the Danbury Federal Correctional Institution. It was the first letter from Jessica in almost a year. I held the letter, feeling its fragile weight. I looked at it for a long time. Maybe it held an apology. Maybe it held blame. Maybe it was another attempt at manipulation. But whatever it said, it belonged to another world, a play whose curtain had already fallen. I didn't open it. I walked calmly to an old wooden box where I kept my gardening tools. I placed the letter inside, underneath spools of twine and small trowels. Then I closed the lid. I wouldn't read it, not today. Maybe not ever. Forgiveness is a long journey, and I knew I wasn't ready. But not reading it wasn't an act of punishment. It was an act of freedom. I was cutting the final string, the string of expectation and false responsibility that had bound me for so long. I returned to my garden, to my friends. Dorothy was there, happily showing off a ripe tomato. I picked up a watering can and began to water my plants. The water soaked into the soil, nourishing life. The sun was warm on my back, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Tom once told me that a good architect knows not only how to build a new structure, but also when to tear down an old, rotten one to make way for something stronger and more true. For many years, I lived inside such a structure, a house built with sweet lies and walls of isolation. I had mistaken its security for love and was terrified to step outside and face the fact that its foundation was rotten from within. This journey has taught me a costly but necessary lesson. It taught me that true weakness isn't in age or loneliness, but in surrendering the right to ask questions. Silence, when used to avoid conflict, becomes an ally to the oppressor. I have learned that love, without respect and truth, can become the most exquisite gilded cage. I lost a house, and I lost the image of a daughter I thought I knew. That pain will never fully disappear. It will become a part of me, like the scars on an old tree. But in return, from those ruins, I found something far more precious. I found my own foundation. It's built not of concrete or steel, but of the resilience, clarity, and self-respect I thought I had lost. And from that foundation, I am rebuilding my life. Not a gleaming skyscraper, but a garden. A garden where everything needs sunlight to grow, where hands must get dirty to cultivate, and where beauty lies not in controlled perfection, but in the vibrant, sometimes thorny, life of the truth. I am no longer a silent architect. I am now a gardener, and I am tending to my own soul. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you are connected with it, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, drop a comment below with your thoughts or your own story. Let's keep the empathy and sharing going.